Let's make sure everyone plays safely today.
The morning sun filtered through our kitchen windows as I packed snacks into Emma's princess backpack. At 6 years old, she was at that magical age where everything was an adventure, and today's destination was the community playground in our HOA Central Park. It was one of those perfect spring Saturdays where the temperature hovered around 75 degrees, with just enough breeze to keep things comfortable. "Mommy, can I wear my rainbow shirt?" Emma called from upstairs, and I smiled at her enthusiasm. We'd only moved into Meadowbrook Hills 3 months ago, and she was finally starting to make friends in the neighborhood. The playground had become our weekend ritual, a place where she could burn off energy while I chatted with other parents and enjoyed my coffee. My husband Marcus was out of town for a work conference, though it was just us girls today. I grabbed my sunglasses, Emma's water bottle, and we headed out the door. The walk to the playground took about 5 minutes, winding through our subdivisions, perfectly manicured streets. Everything about Meadowbrook Hills screamed planned community, from the identical mailboxes to the strict color palette for house exteriors. Our HOA was known for being particularly stringent, but we'd been willing to overlook that for the excellent schools and safe neighborhood as we approached the playground. I could already hear the happy chaos of children playing. The facility was impressive, with modern equipment including a large climbing structure, several slides of varying heights, swings, and a sandbox area. The HOA had spared no expense, and the monthly fees we paid certainly reflected that investment. Emma immediately spotted her friend Sophia and ran ahead, leaving me to find a bench near the other parents. I recognized a few faces and exchanged waves with neighbors I'd met at the last HOA meeting. There was Jennifer with her twin boys, Marcus and Michael, who were currently engaged in an epic sandcastle battle. Tom and his daughter Riley were taking turns on the swings, seeing who could go higher. And there, near the slide, was someone I hadn't seen before. A woman in her late 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer athleisure wear, and an expression that suggested she'd just smelled something unpleasant. She was watching the children with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. Her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. I made a mental note to keep an eye on Emma, though I couldn't have said exactly why this woman set off my internal alarm bells. Emma and Sophia had joined the line for the tallest slide, a spiraling tube that emerged 12 feet up. I watched with pride as Emma climbed the ladder with confidence, something she'd been too scared to do just a month ago. She was growing so fast, becoming braver every day. At the top, she paused to wave at me, her gap-toothed grin visible even from my bench. The blonde woman suddenly moved closer to the slide structure, and I noticed she was now speaking to some of the children. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but several kids looked confused. One little boy, maybe 8 years old, started to climb down from where he'd been waiting his turn. Emma was now at the very top, preparing to sit down and slide. That's when the woman's voice carried across the playground, sharp and authoritative. "You children need to form a proper single-file line. This is chaos. Absolute chaos." Several parents looked up, exchanging confused glances. The kids had been taking turns just fine, the natural order of playground etiquette working as it always did. I stood up, ready to intervene if necessary, but hoping this was just an overzealous grandparent having an off day. Emma was now sitting at the top of the slide, about to push off, when the woman climbed the first few rungs of the ladder. She was still barking instructions about line formation, about rules, about proper playground conduct. "Ma'am," I called out, moving closer. "The kids are doing just fine. They're taking turns." She looked at me with an expression of pure disdain. "I am the HOA vice president, and this playground has rules, posted rules, which these children are clearly not following." She gestured at a sign I'd never really paid attention to, one that listed various playground guidelines in tiny print. Emma had started her descent down the slide when I saw the woman reach up. What happened next occurred so quickly that my brain struggled to process it. The woman grabbed Emma's ankle as she slid past, jerking her violently to the side. Time seemed to slow down as Emma's body was pulled from the slide's curved interior. She tumbled out, her small frame twisting in the air. The entire playground went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing as my daughter fell 12 feet toward the hard-packed ground below. The sound of Emma hitting the ground will haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't a thud or a crash. It was something worse. A combination of impact and an immediate, sharp cry that cut through the air like a knife. My legs were moving before my conscious mind fully registered what had happened, my maternal instincts overriding everything else as I sprinted toward my daughter's crumpled form. Emma was lying on her side beneath the slide structure, her right arm bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. Her face was contorted in pain, tears streaming down her cheeks as she let out gasping, hiccuping sobs. The rainbow shirt she'd been so excited to wear was already collecting dirt and wood chips. "Emma, baby, don't move." I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands hovering over her body, terrified to touch her in case I made something worse. My mind was racing through every first aid course I'd ever taken, every parenting article I'd read about childhood injuries. "Mommy's here," Sweetheart, I'm right here. Round us the playground had erupted into chaos. Parents were rushing over, phones already out to call 911. Children were crying. Some from fear, others because they didn't understand what had happened. Jennifer had already corralled her twins and was keeping other kids back, creating space around us. Tom was on the phone with emergency services, his voice steady as he explained the situation, but my focus was entirely on Emma. Her left eye was already swelling, and there was a gash above her eyebrow bleeding steadily. Her right arm was definitely broken. I could see that much even without medical training, but it was the way she was gasping for breath that terrified me most. Had she hit her head? Her ribs? Was there internal bleeding? Hang on, baby. Help is coming. You're going to be okay. I kept my voice as calm as possible, even though inside I was screaming. My hands were shaking as I carefully moved hair away from her face, trying to assess the damage without moving her. That's when I heard the voice that made my blood run cold. Well, this wouldn't have happened if she'd been following the rules. I looked up to see the blonde woman standing a few feet away, brushing wood chips off her expensive leggings, as if she'd merely stumbled rather than assaulted a child. Her expression was one of irritation rather than concern or horror. She was actually annoyed, as if Emma's broken body was an inconvenience to her day. Something in me snapped. I'd always considered myself a peaceful person, someone who could handle conflict with words rather than actions. But seeing this woman, this stranger who had just violently grabbed my daughter mid-flight, standing there without a trace of remorse, triggered something primal. You, I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. You did this. You grabbed her. I saw you. The woman's perfectly made-up face twisted into an expression of offense. I did no such thing. I was simply trying to enforce the posted playground guidelines. The sign clearly states that children must wait at the bottom of the slide until the previous child has completely exited the landing area. She was already sliding down. Jennifer stepped forward, her voice sharp. We all saw you reach up and grab her leg. He pulled her off the slide. Several other parents murmured agreement, forming a protective circle around me and Emma. Tom had finished with 911 and was now recording the woman with his phone. Something I registered with a dissonant sense of gratitude. I want your name, I demanded, still kneeling beside Emma, but turning my full attention to this woman. Right now, your name and address. The woman drew herself up to her full height, her chin lifting in defiance. I am Patricia Hendricks, Vice President of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, and I have every right to enforce community standards. This playground is HOA property, and these children need to learn to follow rules. You assaulted my daughter. The words came out cold and precise. You grabbed a child on a slide and caused her to fall 12 feet onto the ground. Look at her. My voice cracked on those last words, emotion breaking through my fury. Emma whimpered, trying to curl toward me, and I gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't move, baby. The ambulance is coming. Patricia's face had gone slightly pale, but she held her ground. I barely touched her. If anything, this is a lesson about playground safety. Children need supervision, and clearly, you weren't watching her closely enough. The audacity of that statement nearly knocked me over. Jennifer gasped, and Tom's phone remained steady, capturing every word. Other parents had pulled out their phones too, I realized. This entire confrontation was being documented from multiple angles. You're saying this is my fault? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You physically grabbed a child mid-slide, caused her to fall and possibly sustain serious injuries, and you're blaming me for not supervising her? If she'd been following the rules, Patricia began, but she was cut off by the sound of sirens in the distance. The ambulance was close now, probably less than a minute away. Emma's breathing had steadied slightly, but she was still crying, still in obvious pain. I wanted to scoop her up, hold her, protect her, but I knew better than to move her before the paramedics arrived. Everyone saw what you did, Tom said quietly. Still filming. Multiple witnesses. Multiple videos. You grabbed a 6-year-old child and caused her to fall. I don't care what your position in the HOA is. You just committed assault. Patricia's confidence finally seemed to waver. She looked around at the circle of parents, all of whom were staring at her with varying degrees of horror and disgust. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. The ambulance pulled up to the curb closest to the playground, and 2 paramedics jumped out, medical bags in hand. They moved quickly but carefully, approaching Emma with professional competence. I'm Sarah. I'm a paramedic, the woman said gently, kneeling beside Emma. Can you tell me your name, sweetheart? Emma, my daughter, HICCUPED. The paramedic began their assessment. I never took my eyes off Patricia Hendricks. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The emergency room at County General was a blur of fluorescent lights, antiseptic smells, and concerned medical staff. They'd transported Emma by ambulance while I followed in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Tightly, my knuckles had turned white. I had called Marcus from the parking lot, and even through the phone, I could hear the anguish in his voice as he immediately began looking for the earliest flight home. Emma had been remarkably brave during The initial examination, though she'd cried when they had to manipulate her arm to get the results showed a fractured radius and ulna in her right forearm, requiring immediate setting and casting. The gash above her eyebrow had needed 6 stitches. She also had severe bruising along her left side where she'd initially impacted the ground, and the doctors were keeping her for observation due to concerns about a possible concussion. Now, 3 hours later, Emma was sleeping fitfully in her hospital bed, her arm encased in a bright purple cast that extended from her hand to above her elbow. The swelling around her had gone down slightly with ice treatment, but she was going to have a spectacular black eye. Every time I looked at her small form in that hospital bed, rage surged through me anew. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. 2 police officers entered, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a younger male officer carrying a tablet. "Mrs. Richardson, I'm Officer Martinez, and this is Officer Chun. We'd like to ask you some questions about what happened at the playground today." I stepped into the hallway, careful to keep the door cracked so I could hear if Emma woke up. For the next 20 minutes, I recounted everything I'd witnessed, from Patricia Hendricks' increasingly aggressive behavior with the children, to the moment she'd reached up and grabbed Emma's ankle, pulling her from the slide mid. "We've already spoken with several witnesses at the scene," Officer Martinez said, making notes. "All accounts are consistent with yours. We also have video footage from multiple parents who were recording the confrontation after your daughter fell. What happens now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Officer Chun looked up from his tablet. "We've attempted to make contact with Patricia Hendricks, but she's not answering her door or phone. We have enough evidence to charge her with assault causing bodily harm to a minor, given that she held a position of authority in the HOA and used that position while committing the act. There may be additional charges." Relief washed over me, though it did nothing to ease the sick feeling in my stomach. She was trying to blame Emma, saying it was about playground rules. Officer Martinez's expression hardened. "I've been doing this job for 18 years. Mrs. Richardson, I've seen a lot of people try to justify their actions. What Ms. Hendricks did was assault, plain and simple. No amount of HOA authority or rule enforcement gives anyone the right to physically grab a child on playground equipment." After the officers left, I returned to Emma's bedside and finally allowed myself to cry. Quiet tears streamed down my face as I held her good hand, careful not to disturb the 4-line. My phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from neighbors, all expressing shock and concern. Jennifer had sent multiple texts with updates from the playground, including the information that Patricia had apparently left the scene shortly after the ambulance departed. Marcus called again, and I stepped back into the hallway. "I'm on a flight that leaves in 2 hours, he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I'll be there by 9 tonight. How is she?" I filled him in on the medical details. And when I got to the part about the fracture requiring surgery to properly set the bones, I heard him choke back a sob. "This never should have happened," he said. "How is something like this even possible? Who grabs a kid on a slide?" "Someone who thinks rules are more important than children's safety," I said bitterly. "Someone who believes her position in a homeowners association gives her authority to assault people." After we hung up, I found myself scrolling through my phone, looking at the messages. One in particular caught my attention. It was from Tom, the father who'd been filming. He'd sent me a link to the neighborhood's private Facebook group. "What?" I saw there made my stomach drop. Tom had posted the video he'd taken, and it was even more damning than I'd remembered. It clearly showed Patricia climbing partway up the slide ladder, reaching up, and grabbing Emma's ankle. You could see Emma's body jerk violently to the side. Watch as she tumbled out of the enclosed slide tube and fell to the ground. The video then panned to Patricia's face, capturing her dismissive expression and her statement about rules and supervision. The post had in just 3 hours. It had over 300 comments and had been shared dozens of times. Neighbors I'd never met were expressing outrage. People were calling for Patricia's removal from the HOA board. Someone had posted screenshots of bylaws showing that board members could be recalled with enough votes. Multiple parents were saying they'd witnessed Patricia's aggressive behavior at the playground before, but had never seen it escalate to physical violence. But there were also other comments, ones that made my blood boil. A small but vocal group was defending Patricia, saying that children these days were too undisciplined, that parents weren't supervising properly, that HOA rules existed for a reason. One person actually wrote, "If the child had been following the posted guidelines, this wouldn't have happened." I wanted to respond, to rage at these people who were blaming a 6-year-old for being assaulted by an adult. But Jennifer had already jumped in, posting screenshots of the playground rules they kept referencing. She'd highlighted the specific section they were citing, and in all caps wrote, "This rule is about waiting areas, not about grabbing children mid-slide." Nothing justifies what we all saw. A nurse came by to check Emma's vitals, giving me a sympathetic smile. "She's a tough little one," she said. "The orthopedic surgeon will be by in about an hour to discuss the procedure for tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning? Surgery. My 6-year-old was going to have surgery because a woman obsessed with homeowners association rules had physically assaulted her for the crime of going down a slide. My phone rang. and I didn't recognize the number. Normally I wouldn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Richardson, this is David Park. I'm the president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board. David Park's voice carried a weight of genuine distress. I cannot begin to express how horrified I am by what happened today. I've seen the videos, spoken with multiple witnesses, and reviewed our playground surveillance footage. There's surveillance footage? I hadn't even thought about that possibility. Yes, the playground has security cameras for liability purposes. The footage clearly shows Ms. Hendricks' actions. Mrs. Richardson, I want you to know that the board is holding an emergency meeting tonight. Patricia Hendricks will be removed from her position, effective immediately, and we're cooperating fully with the police investigation. I sank into the chair beside Emma's bed, suddenly exhausted. You tried to blame my daughter. Said it was about following rules. There is no rule, regulation, or guideline that would ever justify what she did, David said firmly. We've already consulted with our attorney. The HOA is accepting full liability for this incident, given that it occurred on HOA property, while Ms. Hendricks was acting in her capacity as vice president. Your daughter's medical expenses will be covered completely, and we'll be discussing additional compensation for her pain and suffering. It was the right thing to say, but it did nothing to ease the ache in my chest. I don't care about the money. I care that my daughter is lying in a hospital bed with a broken arm and a concussion because someone thought enforcing playground rules was more important than a child's safety. I understand, and I am truly, deeply sorry. He paused. I should tell you that this isn't the first complaint we've received about Patricia's behavior. There have been other incidents. Aggressive confrontations with residents over minor violations, but nothing that crossed the line into physical violence. We should have acted sooner. This is on us as a board for not recognizing the escalating pattern. After hanging up with David, I sat in the dimly lit hospital room and finally let myself fully process what had happened. My daughter, my beautiful, brave, adventurous Emma, had been hurt by an adult who was supposed to help maintain a safe community. The betrayal of that felt enormous. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Mommy, right here, baby. I moved closer, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. My arm hurts. I know, sweetie. The doctors are going to fix it tomorrow. They're going to make sure it heals perfectly. She was quiet for a moment, then asked in a small voice, why did that lady grab me? How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes adults do terrible things for inexplicable reasons? That someone's obsession with rules and control can override basic human decency. She made a very bad choice. Emma, what she did was wrong, and she's going to face consequences for it. Is she going to jail? I don't know yet, but the police are handling it, and she's definitely not going to be working for our neighborhood anymore. Over the next few days, I watched as the story spread beyond our small community. Someone had shared the video on social media, and it had gone viral. News outlets picked it up, running stories about HOA overreach and the dangers of giving volunteers too much authority. Patricia Hendricks' face was plastered across local news broadcasts, identified as HOA vice president, under investigation for assault. The police formally charged her with assault causing bodily harm to a minor, reckless endangerment, and child abuse. Her attorney tried to argue that it was an accident, that she'd merely been trying to get Emma's attention, but the video evidence was irrefutable. Multiple camera angles showed her deliberate action, her hand closing around Emma's ankle and pulling. Marcus made it home that first night and barely left Emma's side. The surgery to properly set her arm bones went well, though watching them wheel her into the operating room had been one of the hardest moments of my life. She came through it beautifully, and the orthopedic surgeon assured us she'd have full function once everything healed. 2 weeks after the incident, we received notice that Patricia Hendricks had pled guilty to assault charges as part of a plea deal. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, community service, mandatory anger management classes, and was prohibited from holding any position of authority in homeowners associations. She was also required to pay restitution for all of Emma's medical expenses not covered by the HOA's insurance, plus additional damages. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA board implemented sweeping changes. They created a formal complaint process for residents to report concerning behavior by board members. They instituted training requirements for anyone serving in leadership positions, including de-escalation techniques and appropriate use of authority, and they installed additional safety features at the playground, including padding beneath all equipment and revised guidelines that explicitly stated no adult was permitted to physically intervene with children on equipment. But perhaps the most significant change was in the community itself. Parents organized regular playground supervision rotations, not to enforce rules, but to ensure children's safety and well-being. The incident had shaken everyone's sense of security, but it had also brought neighbors together in a way that felt genuine and supportive. Emma healed, both physically and emotionally, though it took time. She was nervous about playgrounds for several months, and we didn't push her. When she was finally ready to try the slide again, nearly 4 months after the incident, half the neighborhood showed up to support her. Jennifer brought cupcakes. Tom and Riley cheered from the swings. And when Emma reached the top of that slide, looked down at me with determination in her eyes, and pushed off. Sliding down safely and landing with a whoop of triumph, I cried, tears of relief and pride. She still has a small scar above her eyebrow, and the orthopedist says there might be some slight difference in her arm length as she grows, requiring monitoring and possible corrective procedures, but she's resilient, my Emma. She hasn't let what happened make her afraid of the world. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers lurking in dark alleys. Sometimes they're neighbors obsessed with control, people who've convinced themselves that rules and regulations matter more than basic human compassion. And I learned that speaking up, documenting everything, and refusing to let someone in authority minimize their actions can make all the difference between justice and injustice. The playground remains a happy place now, filled with children's laughter and parents' conversations. But none of us who were there that day will ever forget the moment when HOA Karen crossed a line that should never be crossed, and a community came together to ensure she faced the consequences of her actions.